Well, that makes me think of a question. Those days being a kid, working with Steven Spielberg and on a movie any kid would die for, what was your life like in that period? I mean, were you having to learn and go to school on set, or did you actually still go to school somewhere else? I know that you're from Texas, but I mean, did you have to go to a school? Did you have to learn on set? How did that work?
Yeah, so the way it works when you're a kid, under the labor laws, you work for your total day will be 8 hours, right? And that will be comprised of 3 hours of school, 1 hour of lunch, and 4 hours of filming. But it doesn't always work out that way, because on the days that you aren't working, you might go to school for extra hours to bank hours on days where they need to film and they need you more than they need anybody else. And they kind of cut corners and get around the legalities of it like that. Like you can bank hours and use them at a later date. But as a kid, school was always something that I did as an afterthought. Like it was always about my job and making the movie and school. I gotta go to school. I gotta do the school thing. So I didn't really take my academics as seriously as I should have, I think.
Now I heard Steven Spielberg's kind of like a child on set in many ways. Is that true?
That is true. Yeah. I mean, he's a child in the sense that he's excited and invested in everything in a way that kind of excludes anything outside of what he's focused on. And it's kind of amazing because I feel like he would do every job on set if he had the opportunity to. If he had the chance to be an actor as well as the camera operator and the boom operator, he would do it all.
That's a little Tarantino-esque.
Yeah, but it's that whole thing of, he is completely immersed in the process, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to make that story come true.
And there's no better way to do it when you exercise that level of control in so many different areas, because that way you make sure your vision really.
True. It's true.
Now, how did he come across to you and Drew Barrymore and the other kids? I mean, how was he able to elicit such stellar performances from children?
Well, he had a great way of communicating to kids that didn't make you feel like he was an adult talking down to you. He felt kind of like a co-conspirator. You were a collaborator. You weren't some kid, and you guys were doing something special together. It was really cool. So when Steven would come up and give you a note, it was to serve the story always. And we were always about, getting the best of what we could get on film. That was the goal.
How did you and the cast interact with E.T.? I mean, was it hard to interact with essentially a puppet and make it believable, especially at that young age? Or did it seem easier for that because when you're a kid, there's more make-believe and what have you?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, you can sort of gloss over certain things as a kid, I think, a little bit more easily, or it's more believable when a kid does it anyway. But it was difficult for me at times because I had a lot of emotional scenes with this puppet, and I had to make that all happen, which was easy within the framework of the world because, E.T. becomes very important to the character and vice versa. And So as an actor, I was able to do it. As a young performer, I was able to do it. But I was never under the impression that, oh, this is a real creature. And,
Yeah.
But, Drew Barrymore was young enough at the time that the veil between reality and fantasy wasn't quite so intact. And so she imagined the puppet as being real sometimes and would talk to him and wrap a scarf around his neck and worry about what he was going to have for lunch and things like that.
The first time you saw the film, was that at a private screening? Was that in a theater? Was that in the debut of it? When did you first see it? And what do you remember about that first time you saw it in its completed form?
It was a premiere in Houston, Texas. And it was the first time I had seen it. And I saw it with an audience. And I was blown away by the audience's reaction. Because, when you make a film, it's piecemeal and it's kind of like watching paint dry. And especially in those days when there wasn't playback or anything like that, it's just like a guy with a camera going, okay, well, we've got it. I think, we'll know in a few days.
Yeah, you can't go back and look at the scene and go, let me see what my expression looks like in that real quick. Whereas now you can just go back and boom, they just, and you look at it, you go, okay, I need to change this right now. Let's do that again. Right.
Or, well, I mean, just the mere fact of, more than one or two people being able to see what's in the frame, that was solely, trust in the operator and the first AC who was pulling focus. That was, you saw in dailies 3 days later whether or not they did a good job, and then if they did a bad job, they were fired and replaced.
And then you might be shooting something over again, which then puts people behind.
Well, yeah, it costs a lot of money, right? So we get it right the first time. It's a different thing now because now you have a video village where anybody who can see the screen can see what's in the frame and how the shot's tracking, and they can correct it and stop it then and reset it. Yeah, filmmaking has changed a bit technically. I mean, it's still the same. It's the same process. It's just a little bit more finely tuned, I suppose.
When E.T. ship is closing in and taking off and that John Williams score swells to its crescendo, when you're there watching it yourself the first time, what were you feeling as a kid in that moment?
Well, it's great to be a part of something like that because especially to see where the audience is at that point. To see it in a theater with an audience is a fantastic experience.
When you look back on all these years, later, what's your favorite memory from working on that film?
I have a lot of memories of working on that film and a lot of favorites. It's funny though, because it's not so much one specific memory as it is the collection of the whole thing. And they're mostly banal, kind of very boring, commonplace, everyday memories, like my dressing room, my bike that I used to ride around the stages and, get yelled at for not being findable, I suppose. Yeah, so, things like that. But it's never anything that was in the film. It's always stuff that happened behind the scenes, yeah.